Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Default Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and remote work experts from all around the world to share their experiences. Our guest today is Amanda Cait, Manager of People and Culture at Avalon. Amanda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Finn. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, Amanda, let's start with your background. You have this remarkable background in fostering company culture and advocating for diversity and inclusion. So, could you maybe start by telling our listeners more about your journey and how your passion for these areas has shaped your career?
Yeah, so I think my background is a little bit different from some of the other people that you've interviewed. But I went to school and I got a degree in adult development, families, and well-being with a minor in family and child studies, which is maybe the longest name of a degree that exists in history. I did some postgraduate studies in couple and family therapy. I grew up, I have disabilities. So for me, it was tough because in a time where I didn't feel like I had a lot of power, I was playing video games because that really made me feel powerful. It led me to feel strong in maybe a time that I didn't feel very strong. My work background is kind of all over the place. I worked in retail, I worked in tech, I worked in sales. Um, and one of the things that is also noticeable or notable is I worked in recreation and long term care. So with very sick older adults, playing as a form of therapy. There's therapeutic aspects to it. So being able to switch from that to being in game, something that brought a lot of therapy to me was really amazing. I created a contracting firm called Monstera Interactive. And then Sean, who's the CEO of Avalon, met with me, and he just sort of was like, "Oh my God, you're doing all of that? That's amazing!" Brought me on board as the HR ops manager, and now I'm the manager of people and culture at this amazing startup game studio.
That's awesome. And I would like to talk about like changes in different, industries, specifically in the gaming space, right? It's often tough to make changes in established companies and in industries, especially if the benefits are not immediately clear in terms of profit, right? For
Yes.
owners, let's call it like that. So, have you faced any challenges with traditional this corporate norms due to your passion for this diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think it's been I don't know how much you know about the game industry, but it's been a little bit notorious for being toxic, which is really unfortunate. There's been a lot of uh, it's been really challenging to sort of combat a lot of the learned sort of thinking behind, people in the industry, and a lot of people know that it's not where it should be and that things are changing. So one of the things that I think is so important is prevention. And in order to prevent that, we sort of have to educate people on what's okay and not okay to say and do in the workplace. And it's not just the game industry that's notorious for things like that. So there's challenges that I faced personally being an employee at several different organizations. Um, and I think the biggest first step is being able to educate people, so that they can start to recognize, oh, you know what, this is what I should be expecting, and I shouldn't tolerate X, Y, and Z. And at the same time, I should be able to, like, I recognize maybe this is as a microaggression, and I should stand up and not just be a bystander, and stuff like that.
And what is if you're talking about the gaming space, what challenges are still out there that we shouldn't ignore from your point of view?
Um, I mean, in terms of, do you mean like in terms of actual gaming or the gaming industry?
The gaming industry, probably.
Um, so in terms of, like, you mean just general I just wanna make sure, could you rephrase the question a little bit? I wanna make sure I answer it correctly.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's the same, right? So in terms of this inclusive, right? So you're an advocate for inclusive gaming communities, I know,
Yes.
right? But the industry has faced a number of issues around that, right? So, and I'm just curious to know from this aspect, what challenges are still there that we should solve, kind of.
Yeah, I think there's this misconception everywhere that people are just sort of like the same and should be treated as like a cookie cutter sort of cutout. Um, the game industry, there's not a lot of diversity. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of women in the space. And I think it's important for us to create a safe space for having conversations using person first language, and making sure when you have when you have that space, and that safe space to have that conversation, people feel more comfortable talking about their accessibility needs. um, I mean, one time, it wasn't in the game industry, but one time when I mentioned having a disability, I had my supervisor go, "Can you even do this job?" Which is just not, it's not appropriate to say. It doesn't empower people to say, like, you know, it doesn't make people feel capable. And it really shuts down conversation. People will feel uncomfortable coming to you and saying, "Hey, um, I really I really need this from you so that I can succeed in the workplace." And success and work styles are very different from person to person, and just being able to recognize that and celebrate people for who they are and value them for their capabilities, and having seats at the table for everybody to create innovation.
Yeah, and speaking about Avalon, right? Avalon is famous for its people first culture, right? So however, we know that people first is often just a buzzword. I'm not saying about your company, but just in general. And many companies didn't live up to it, right? So especially like during tough times, let's call it like that. So can you share some initiatives or examples that show how Avalon generally prioritizes its people even in challenging situations?
Yeah. Okay, so this is funny because I work really hard at this. This is my whole job, is making sure that um we put people first. And what I say all the time in interviews is that we're not an employee first company, because when you say employee first, that implies that a person has to always be on as an employee. I always say we're a human first company. We put the person above being an employee, because you are a person first. That's what matters. Your family matters. Your work life balance, all of that stuff matters. So I always say that. And we have sort of internal branding that helps us sort of make sure that people know that. We have our cultural values, which is empower creativity, be the best you, encourage the heart, defy the impossible, pursuit of joy. And we have this internal we use Nectar for employee recognition, which is sort of gamifying, to make sure that people are rewarded for upholding these cultural values. And a lot of people talk the talk and say that they do this sort of stuff. And I remember, it's so different here. It really is. And I'm not just saying that because I'm manager of people and culture. I'll give you an example. Is one time, my dog, who is my pride and joy, he was very sick and I had to rush him to the emergency room. But as the person running the culture screens for hiring, I was panicked, and I think I had 3 screens that day, and I just didn't know what to do. I wrote to a group chat saying, "Hey guys, I have to take my dog to the hospital." And Sean, the CEO, and Zach, the COO, they both stepped up and took my interviews for me, which is unheard of, right? They were like, "No, just go. Don't worry about this." And they handled it for me, which it's still very touching to think about. And it's a really, I could say things, but without real examples, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. But you know that still stuck with me. And there we have a whole our whole mission statement is building people, building games. And it was shortly after that I came up with that, because I mean, obviously that whole situation was so impactful, but I remember I was brushing my teeth. It was late at night, and I ran up to my husband because I came up with it in my head, and I was so excited, and I was just like, mouth full of toothpaste going, and he was like, "What are you saying? I don't understand." I was just so excited to that I came up with it. And I'm happy that we now use it. Obviously, I ended up becoming coherent after finishing brushing my teeth, but I think I don't even remember. It was super late. I posted about it, and then they were like, "That's really good. We're going to use that." And we're really true to that word, and we try to, nobody's perfect, but we continue trying and really going for it because we value people are the biggest asset to a company. You can't do things without them. So yeah, we just want to make sure that we place our values there and prove it every day.
That's awesome. And from the talent perspective, sometimes there's a gap between company values and real actions, right? So
Yeah.
from the talent perspective, what warning signs show a company isn't following its values? Uh, how can I recognize that without being a part of it yet?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of red flags that you can look for when you are a candidate that's because you're interviewing a company as much as they're interviewing you. So you should always feel empowered to ask questions. Um, I always have that space at the end of the interview. Do you have any questions for us? And I think it's really a shame if people don't use that space to have conversations. It's your opportunity to ask about culture. And if there is something specific, you should push on it if it really matters to you. So a lot of companies will have, for example, unlimited paid time off. And then you get all excited, like, wow, that's a really amazing perk. And then you go in and you say, okay, I would like this time off, please. And they go, no, you, sorry, denied, not going to happen. Right. And then it doesn't really happen. So, a question that you could ask, let's say, if that's something that really matters to you and finding out if, they put their money where their mouth is asking, hey, when's the last time you took a week off of work, a week or two off of work? When's the last time you went on vacation and utilized your PTO? They if the answer is never or something like that, then it's probably a red flag. And I think you spend arguably more time at work than you do at home. So it's really important to suss this stuff out and figure all of that out. So yeah, that's what I recommend you do when you're having those interviews.
But are there any specific tips for remote employees, for remote um, employees, contractors, or whatever, who are far from the main office? How they can verify if the company truly upholds its values? Except that example that you gave. Can you suggest anything else?
Um, yeah, I mean, you should again, I really think using that time at the end of the interview is so important to have those conversations. If there's another thing that you can ask is if you became the CEO overnight with no repercussions or questions or anything that would come back at you, what would you change and why? And if there's, let's say, like 3 rounds of interviews, you ask that every time and it's the same answer, something hasn't changed. Why hasn't that changed? And my dad always says, um, when management refuses to change is when it needs to change. So, having a company that doesn't have the ability to look inwards, and it doesn't matter if it's a remote or not a remote company, it's important that people recognize that changes need to be made. And they need to yeah, they need to act on it, right? They can't just see it. If everybody can see it and they don't do it, then it's kind of meaningless, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. And for companies that are growing, right, especially internationally, especially globally, values, from my point of view, can get sort of watered down, right? So how do
Mhm.
you avoid losing focus on your mission? Any traps that companies should look out for?
You mean the companies or the people who are getting
In
interviewed?
this case, I guess we're talking about companies, like from the management perspective.
Um, yeah, so I think again, it's important to understand that people have different cultural values and that each country has different um, labor standards and laws and stuff like that. And it's so important to have an HR person to make sure that that stuff sort of gets sorted and figured out and understood. But at the same time, you have to utilize tools like EORs because one person can't know everything for every country all the time. I've tried, it's impossible. I continue to try, it's still impossible. But yeah, I think that's sort of the biggest thing is people taking the initiative to try and people taking the making sure that people are looked after in all of the respects. So um again, like making sure that they are upholding the labor laws and the standards. And the other thing too is you mentioned contractors. I think obviously contractors can't be treated the same way as full-time employees. They can't have benefits and stuff like that, but still making sure that they feel like they're part of a team. That's so important. um, those are the things that I think are tremendously impactful when it comes to expanding globally, and making sure that you're still upholding those values.
Yeah, and Avalon works with talent from many countries, as
Yeah.
far as I understood, right? So, and did you have any specific checklist when you was kind of when you were deciding which country to start hiring from?
So, no, and that's kind of the beautiful part of it is that we're finding people like the best talent, right? Because the best talent isn't all in, North America or, one country or another. Like that's not where it is, right? And um video games, you need art, you need and there's so much more to video games than people think. There's like a billion different types of artists and a billion different types of designers, and there's engineer, so many different things. So finding just like the amazing talent that exists in the world and being able to have them on board has been really special. And again, working with different EORs and being able to have them, whether it's as contractors or as employees, has been huge for us. And I think that's what sort of set us apart from maybe a lot of other companies, is being able to just hire the best talent that exists. You can see my background for those of you who are visually tuning in. It's amazing. And again, we're finding people
It
that
is.
align. We're finding people that align with our values as a company as well. So we're building up a team that's talented and just like the perfect Avalon team.
Yeah, so Avalon is global first company, which is cool, right? So, but let's talk about maybe about the downsides of this. So, remote work and especially this global hiring stuff doesn't suit everyone, frankly
Mhm.
speaking, right? So, what are your thoughts on the let's call it last talk about challenges of remote work?
Yeah. So I think a big thing, and part of this is because I'm a pretty hardcore extrovert, as I'm sure you could probably tell from our short time here. So I think communication is the biggest thing.
Hmm.
It's hard when you have people in different time zones. I find that to be probably the hardest. Being able to talk to, we have people who are in the EU who are only on in the morning. We have somebody from Saudi Arabia, and she's only on in the morning, and sometimes it's a little bit challenging when you have people on the Pacific time and trying to like make all of that work. It can be really tricky. And I think one of the things, and I sort of mentioned this before, is the way that we gamify. We use Nectar as an employee recognition software, and we built that out, and it's nice to be able to have see the shout outs that people get. So shouting out somebody for doing an amazing job or supporting another person, and being able to see that And again, the other thing with communication, and sort of what we mentioned before, is we have designers and we have engineers and we have artists. So sometimes seeing the big picture of the game can be challenging. So we have stand-ups for each group and we sort of open it up. So people who are outside of the art team can go to the art weekly stand-up and see where people are at. They can go to the design weekly stand-up and see where they're at. There's no space that's exclusive, because we care about people seeing the big picture. We want people to be able to communicate, and that, that's another big thing. Another thing too is I think it's important that people allow, or companies allow, for a bigger budget with travel, because it's important for people to see each other every once in a while. Um, and we don't want anybody to feel excluded. Loneliness is actually being considered an epidemic, so it can be even more isolating when you're in a remote workplace. So it's important that you over communicate. If anything, you check in with people to see how they're doing. All of those things are really meaningful. So yeah, that's where I find importance in that.
Yeah, but maybe my last question would be, what might be your three key pieces of advice that you can give to leaders who are new to this international expansion and who are just about to start this global hiring journey?
Again, utilizing EORs and the stuff, you can't know everything. It is so hard to know everything. And making sure that you know the specific laws and regulations about the country before
And which one do
you.
you use?
So we sort of have like a mix of different things. We use remote.com. We also use
Uh-huh.
Rippling. But
Okay.
yeah, so remote.com has been really helpful because you can sort of uh see the snapshot of the country, and what the expectations would be, and what the structures are, and the laws and regulations and that sort of stuff prior, how much it would cost your company, in the currency that you use, instead of the currency that another country uses. Um, and using something like Rippling, the payroll software, is really cool for contractors because you can pay them in their local currency, which is really important, because sometimes, it can change with, from USD to euros in a matter of a day. And that can sort of make it a little bit harder to pay rent and budget and all of that sort of stuff. Maybe not with euros, because euros is pretty solid, but you know what I mean. So with that, I think also just, again, with any company, making sure you're putting people first is so important. But especially with global companies, learning the customs of the culture can be really important. Making sure you know when the holidays are. That's always, and knowing, okay, maybe in this country they're not allowed to work Fridays. Make sure that person doesn't work Fridays. That's important. Um, so that's always a
You're
thing.
talking about Israel, right?
Partly Israel, I think also Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
but yeah, that, Israel too. So it's important to know those things, and also, speaking of that, it's important to know, um, politically what's going on, and being able to support your team members, with that sort of stuff as well, even if you don't outwardly have, things on social media. It's important to reach out to the people in your company and, like, are you okay? And just, making sure people are okay, because it really does impact everybody. It doesn't really, like, it does matter where they're located, but it's always important to check in.
Yeah.
But I think also, like I mentioned before, having that extra travel. We had a retreat in Seattle for our leadership team, and being able to see everybody in person was amazing. And I cannot wait for the next one. It was so wildly incredible. And then lastly, just communication is so important, and making sure that people are, you're respecting their time zones, right? You don't want somebody on until 11 p.m. It's just not sustainable. You want to make sure their work life balance is something that you're looking out for, because I think a lot of people try to prove themselves, and a lot of people have imposter syndrome, and that's everywhere. That's global, I'm
Yeah,
just gonna say.
that's true.
So it's important that you have
Yeah.
as much communication as possible all the time. Yeah, and I think that those are the main things. But it does make the world smaller in such an amazing way. And again, being able to recruit talent that is the best talent,
Hmm.
and their values line up with your values, is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Amanda, for sharing your insights on remote first culture at Avalon, this challenges and obstacles of hiring globally. Yeah, we wish you and your company, Avalon, all the best in your journey. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you so much. You too. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you.